joy of it was all the colour, because all the coaches were coloured. You had, because all the companies basically had colours within their names.
Every company had a different livery, and you recognised which coach you were going for by the colour of the coach, basically.
You had the wonderful green coaches of the Southdown Company. You had the dark red of East Kent, and you had the lighter red of Thames Valley.
These were the 1950s, a unique era of travel between the heyday of the railways and before mass air flights took off, when the coach became the people's transport. Together, they ventured out from sleepy villages and chimney-choked towns into the big wide world.
We had a rainbow that started at the coach station, and the colours spread to all the ends of the kingdom. We were a rainbow.
When the coach was king, jams were of the strawberry rather than the traffic variety. For many passengers, the coach offered the first heady taste of adventure and freedom. A safe, comfy capsule on wheels from which they could glimpse wonders that lay beyond their own backyard. And unlike the train, the touring coach could pick you up from wherever you wanted.
You can hire a private coach to go anywhere you like, any time you like, and we can organise the whole thing for you.
An offer few at the time would have refused, especially one particular passenger.
My best memories of coach travel is how everybody got on together like a big happy family. And every coach was the same. There might be 40 coaches all in a line following you. And if you pull up anywhere, you could hear people in the coach behind singing and having a laugh, It was wonderful. That's stuck with me all the time, Happy, everybody was happy.
Nobody was that fussy, nobody was in a hurry, and everybody took the simple things and enjoyed them.
The sweet sound of a good old-fashioned sing-song. It was the magic ingredient of every successful coach trip, binding its passengers together in coachly harmony.
I think camaraderie is something, it's rather a well-kept secret with coach groups.
And people get up and impersonate, stars like that, and comedians with the flat caps and things like that. Some of the men would get up and stand at the front, have the place in roaring laughter. Everybody used to be hanging out the seats like this, looking down, and then just standing up and cheering and clapping.
And if you think that's what I look, I'll tell you why I'm here and what my...
I can remember people taking George Formby off. He was one of the most popular ones,
I'm leaning on a lamppost at the corner of the street in case a certain little lady comes by.
There was one group we used to tell you so many jokes, you'd have to pull up and have a rest, because you couldn't listen to them all.
It didn't take very long for parties to gel. Everyone became very attached, to each other.
They surely did. In the days before air conditioning, even stifling summer heat was all part of the onboard atmosphere.
Some of the men would be sweating that much because they still wore the suits on, they didn't often take the jackets off in those days. They'd still be sat all suited up, nice and posh. So when they started sweating, they got so hot. They used to take their hanky out of the pocket, put a knot in each corner, and then put it on top of their head, pull it down over the head, and they'd sit there. And it'd stop the sweat coming down the face, you see. But then, after about 10 minutes walking out, the hanky would get red hot, full of sweat and wet, so they'd take it off into the... it was lino on the floor in those days, all cloth down the middle, so they'd wring it out and all the water would go on the floor. Then they'd put it back on their head, and they'd be like that, gasping.
Whether it was on express journeys or touring trips, these sweaty encounters were unique to the communal coach experience. But rather than putting them off each other, they brought them closer together.
We were all very friendly, and it was quite an emotional time when we all said goodbye.
The coach was driving its way into the heart of the nation, joining up Britain's villages and towns like a giant dot to dot along well-worn routes carved out by the stagecoaches of the previous century. Coach travel had its origins in the stagecoach, which travelled along set routes in stages. By the mid-19th century, the railways had all but driven them from Britain's roads. But by the turn of the 20th century, entrepreneurs were experimenting again.
The coach started off with horse buses and horse coaches and seaside rides on what were called charabancs. The word charabanc is French for carriage with benches.
And it seemed that creativity was key in this new industry.
Firstly, before they got the posh charabancs, which was the one with hoods on, they used to convert just normal haulage lorries, folding steamers. They were folding steamer lorries, and they used to convert them at weekends. They used to do removals in the week with a container body on the back. And on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning early, they'd take them into the depot and swap the bodies over.
I mean, my grandfather always used to tell this story. He lived in Woodford Green in Essex, and the local pub was obviously a stopping off point for coaches returning, or charabancs returning to the East End of London, and they would stop of an evening, and it's a bit like a Laurel and Hardy film. They would get out of one door, get back on drunk, and then get out the other door. So whoever's organising, and he claimed it was the vicar with the church outing, which I think is a bit extreme.
They used to borrow the church pews from the local church, bolt them to the floor of this sort of makeshift, I'd call it a hut really, with curtains. And people would climb up on ladders and climb in.
This design was called the slipper because it was shaped like a bedroom slipper. But you can guarantee the journey was anything but cosy and comfortable.
Well, all these early charabancs were originally on solid rubber tyres, all the bigger ones, until the mid-1920s, because pneumatics didn't really come in till then.
You used to go through the town centres where cobbled streets, everybody like that. All the men were holding a false tooth and like, you know, otherwise if they smile, the teeth would fall out. Because it was that rickety bang, bang, bang like this.
But not all charas were so makeshift.
Then they got the luxury one, a purpose-built one, which was what my grandparents first went on, and that was real luxury. Proper seats in it and everything, like long, they used to call it a toast rack, because it was like a toast rack. All the seats were long. The little doors, they had 10 little doors along the side of the coach, and everybody got in their own little door like and sat on the seats.
The toast rack, with the passengers all lined up inside like boiled egg soldiers. Slippers and toast racks. What would they think up next? Enter the horn.
The driver has a bulb horn here to tell people to get out of the way, but he's got another little trick up his sleeve here, and that is an exhaust whistle. And this blows gases from number 4 cylinder. Every time it comes up on the firing stroke, it'll whistle.
And passengers had to be equally inventive when it came to keeping dry.
When it rained, people didn't bother about pulling the hood up. If they were only going to local or Blackpool, they'd put the umbrella up instead. And they'd all sit under the umbrella because it only chugged along about 8 miles an hour, you know. So instead of messing about stopping the charabanc, pulling the hood up, just put your umbrella up, and they all sat there under a brolly like, you know, happy as Larry.
The best thing for driving in the rain is a potato. If you cut a potato in half and smear it on the windscreen, you don't get lots of little drops of water. But this charabanc had the luxury of a windscreen wiper. Although it's hand operated, you have to lean over the window and it wipes both sides, because obviously it gets wet behind as well.
In 1911, a group of passengers were due to take a train from Rochdale to Torquay. Among them was a young girl whose singing talents would go on to play a special role during the Second World War. Her name was Gracie Fields. But there was a problem.
In June there was a train strike and they couldn't come down, they was all absolutely upset. So they got the chap that was working for them, Robert Halt, who came in to be Yellowways. His friend had the only charabanc in Rochdale. So he said, well, go and tell your friend, we'll use a charabanc. He said, don't talk stupid, we'll never get down to Torquay. He said, it's miles, it's like 290 miles. The charabanc won't get down there, or if it does, it'll take us a week. Oh no, he said, we've got to get down there somehow. We'll use a charabanc, we'll treat it as an adventure and see what happens. Anyway, they piled in and Gracie Fields was amongst them because her friend was the granddaughter of Edwards and Briney's, little Florence Briney. So she came with Florence and it took them 2 full days to get here.
The 13-year-old Gracie duly won a talent competition in Paynton, which boosted her confidence as a performer. Confidence was also growing in the coach industry itself.
And it was such a success when they got back that's when they started doing fare-paying passengers the year after. And that's when the first fare-paying passenger service started. Holt Brothers Yellowway became the pioneers of long-distance travel from the northwest to Torquay.
So Yellowways were on the map. And by the end of World War I, so were a good many more coach operators.
The First World War made all the difference because not only did the internal combustion engine get more reliable, had to do because of the circumstances. At the end of the war, there was a huge number of army lorries thrown into the Margate army surplus, which were very cheap. I understand soldiers were given a lump sum, thank you very much, off you go. And a lot of them bought the lorries. And in those days, you had a chassis and the lorry body was just bolted onto the back. And the clever ones, Monday to Friday, used them to carry coal, goods or whatever, and then put a different back end on and carried passengers at weekend.
Perhaps more importantly than the technology was the fact that the war produced soldiers or ex-soldiers who were skilled in engineering, who could maintain these new motor vehicles, knew how to drive them. Many of these men were looking for things to do in the new post-war world.
In the 1920s and 30s, motoring had really arrived, and it produced a social revolution as people began to take to the road for pleasure outings. For those who couldn't afford a car of their own, there were the charabancs and the motor coaches.
It was little wonder then that when the railways went on strike again in 1919, coach companies jumped at the chance to put on extra services.
People still wanted to travel, and so Royal Blue and other coach operators put on services during that period, and they proved to be popular, sufficiently popular that some of the services continued. Services by Southdown from Brighton, for example, services from the north of England, basically to London.
Those early coach operators were canny businessmen, keeping their fares well below the cost of a rail ticket. And the brand new passengers who'd tried out coach travel during the rail strike ended up staying.
And so a whole new business grew up as a result of that rail strike, offering the opportunity to people like Royal Blue to start running long-distance services.
Until 1930, the coach industry was running pretty much as it wanted. Anyone could set up a business, and you didn't need a licence.
Usual problems came as a result of this. There was no regulation. Safety became an issue. There was no driver's hours. Drivers were working long hours for not a lot of money, so were almost 24 hours.
The road transport scene was almost unregulated in the 1920s. There were no or few speed limits. People didn't have to take driving tests, and the death figures were horrendous.
Something had to be done.
The words traffic commissioner suddenly appeared, and the traffic commissioner, of which there was a number regionally, was God.
In 1928, there were only just over 2 million vehicles on the road. Now there are about 34.5 million vehicles on the road. In 1928, there were almost 6,000 deaths on the road. Now, with 17 times the number of vehicles, the figures are down to about 2,500. So it shows something had to be done. People were being killed. Coaches and buses and lorries were fighting for trade, and really the public needed protection.
After 1930, if you wanted to operate a coach service, you had to have a licence, and to match its new regulated image, the industry needed coach stations.
The places where people were picking up coaches, Grosvenor Gardens and other areas in London, they couldn't cope with the number of coaches, and the traffic was just too much. And the police in London were getting a bit stroppy with the coach operators, saying, you're going to have to do something about this.
There was no, in 1930, big coach stations like Victoria. Coaches were scattered all around London. The embankment was completely jammed with coaches going off all parts of England.
And so it was desperate to find somewhere to have as an off-street terminal.
But finding available plots of land in central London was not easy.
London Coastal Coaches saw that there was this site, pounced on it, and immediately made plans for what became Victoria Coach Station.
The design of the coach station was particularly cutting edge with its Art Deco frontage. In 1932, it welcomed its first inhabitants, who immediately moved in, the coaches.
The first coach to actually operate in was a coach which had come up, I believe, from Maidstone.
So we had the coaches, we had the coach station. All we needed now were the passengers. And those came in droves with the passing of a new government bill.
So in 1937, there was the Holiday with Pay Act. And the government tried to encourage employers to pay workers while on holiday. So before 1937, workers could only really afford to take one day off, so the charabanc was the cheapest and best way to take that holiday. So only 1.5 million people before 1937 had holidays with pay. After 1937, that rose to over 11 million people, so people could afford to take a few days off alongside perhaps the annual holiday. On the back of this, Billy Butlin sets his camp up in Skegness in 1936, and there's a roaring trade.
With Britain's new holidaying population, the coach now had a ready market of willing passengers. But World War II provided another unscheduled stop.
Gradually, the operation of coaches was restricted. The Green Line services in the London area were stopped. Some of them came back, but most of them were stopped. And eventually, I think in 1941, the Ministry of Transport stopped all but essential coach services.
The war wasn't all bad news for coaches. The end of hostilities and the social revolution that followed would help create the conditions for the industry's expansion. By the early 1950s, with wartime restrictions lifted, people were bursting to go on holiday.
As the war ends, you see a boom in coach travel in the 50s and 60s. It's not only have you got an annual trip, perhaps for the work or community, still going on, but you've also got longer excursions for longer durations. And people in the 50s particularly begin to have more money, so their excursions go longer and more exotic in that sense.
With so many people desperate to get away, the atmosphere at Victoria Coach Station was buzzing. During the summer months of the mid-50s, over 20,000 coaches poured in and out of the station every week.
The feeling was there are all those people wanting to get away. It was a challenge. Very often, when it was really crazy with all the phones ringing, there was a carnival atmosphere. You know, there was an absolute carnival atmosphere. There's a wonderful picture which was a mid-1930s departure scene, and the assembled passengers waiting to get on the coach. That is the most wonderful thing. They are all so well dressed. Ladies in fox furs, ladies in dresses, long dresses to their ankles, very elegant shoes and hats. Every man in the picture is wearing a hat. School children in their best school uniforms, and it's just a magic picture that captures absolutely the excitement that people were finding in this very, very new industry.
A carnival at the coach station. So if you were going on a coach trip, you'd be sure to pick your best frock for the occasion.
The ladies, strangely enough, used to wear a headscarf with their hair in rollers. They had the best clothes on, so their hair would be nice. When they got to Torquay, before they went in the guest house or wherever they're staying, they got off the coach, and the first thing they did was go to the cafe in the ladies' room and take their hair out of rollers and do their hair. And then they get into the taxi or the bus, and so they turn up at the hotel looking right posh, like, you know. That was fascinating me.
It's magic days, absolutely magic days.
For the hundreds of thousands who had ventured little further than their own town or village before the war, a journey by coach was impossibly exciting, and the longer the journey, the better.
We set off from Leeds with passengers. We picked up passengers in Leeds. We then went through to Wakefield and picked up more. And then we joined, of course there were no motorways, of course, at that point. So we joined what was known as the Great North Road. Today it's the A1. We joined that and we had a coffee stop in Newark. And again, other passengers joined from the east side of Britain. And then it was on. We had a full 3-course lunch in Buckden, Cambridgeshire. Afternoon tea after we'd been through London and crossed the Thames. We had an afternoon tea in Eltham, and then it was on to Folkestone. The journey took all day, more or less, with the stops. We arrived in Folkestone at the Hotel Metropole, very nice hotel on the Lees at Folkestone, and we were there about 6 p.m. for dinner and overnight. That was our first day.
Dave Haddock loved coach travel so much, he made the same 17-hour journey every year for 25 years.
I couldn't concentrate at school. I couldn't do my schoolwork proper, you know. I just wanted to finish school. I couldn't wait to get home. And when we finished school, on the last day, I legged it home, and I ran all the way home as fast as I could. And I had my own case there. And the first thing I wanted to do when I come in the house was pack my case for morning. Like, you know, I was going away in the morning.
As the novelty of coach travel caught on, it provided the perfect form of transport for the lingering tradition of Wakes Weeks, where whole towns took their holiday all at the same time.
One of the highlights of the year for many people was the annual holiday. And in industrial towns, this was often coinciding with the factory shutdown.
During an industrial fortnight or a Coventry week or Birmingham week, the whole city would essentially close. You would walk down a sort of industrial district and not hear any machinery going. There'd be no transport connected to those factories. It'd be a ghost town, effectively. There'd been a mass evacuation of people through coach and through other transport to their holiday destination.
And so everyone had to go on holiday that week, and people describe what it was like on the first Saturday of the holiday, with neighbours standing on street corners with their children, suitcases, buckets and spades, waiting for the local coach to come and pick them up and take them off.
The coach was very, very convenient. I mean, it would turn up at your factory, it would turn up at your Sunday school, it would turn up at your village hall or wherever and pick you up from where your party wanted to be picked up. You didn't have to get to the local station.
Helpful and accommodating coaches may have been, but not when it came to dealing with luggage.
Well, they used to put the luggage on the roof in those days, you know, they'd pile them in the boot, and also on the roof, so the driver used to climb up the ladders at the back, and they'd throw the cases up and tie them all on the roof, and put a tarpaulin over. And I thought, man, that's amazing, you know.
With the luggage secured, it was time to safely stow the human cargo.
people felt very comfortable at the thought that they and their neighbours could be picked up. They would be able to pay in during the year for the trip, so they knew they had enough money to cover things. And then they would all go together, they would stop on the way for a drink, they would have a drink on the coach, and it would all be very sociable and safe, and they'd be home safely, and it would be a really good time. And it would be part of looking forward to it, the day out the children could come and so on.
The coach journey is a social form of transport. As opposed to a train, which is more compartmentalised in the sense of different carriages. It's very difficult to get a sing-song going on a train many ways, but in a coach it has that sort of very familiar, very communal form of outing.
And whether you were travelling on a leisurely touring coach or a scheduled express service, you could always be sure that the leader of the gang, the hero of the communal coach revolution, was the driver.
I'm 82 now, and I've been driving a bus 61 years, and driving a car a few years longer than that, and I've driven in the army for a few years. So altogether really since I was 16.
And every driver would have a trick or two up his sleeve.
I can remember going to Bournemouth once, and during the day, while the people were all out on the beach or something, I got all the keys off the manager and went round the hotel and changed everybody's night clothes. I took the night clothes off of one floor and put them on the other floor, so when it's time to go to bed, everybody's roaring up and downstairs looking for their night clothes. Things like that. Good fun, really. You'd get shot if you'd done that now, wouldn't you?
Driving was almost incidental to what these men did, for they were also entertainer, guide, protector, mechanic, nursemaid and diplomat. But most of all, your beloved leader.
Right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I wish to introduce myself to call me Leslie. Now then, a lot calls me Cannonball. You'll hear it a lot on this trip. Everybody calls me Cannonball, so you can please yourself, but it's Leslie or Cannonball. Now then, on this trip, well, I've been on the firm that long, sir, 30 years. So everybody will hear them all call me Cannonball, but it doesn't matter, they ignore them. They don't know my name. So on the way down, I have to keep explaining things to you on all the way down. If you want to know anything at all, don't forget, just ask. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to give you a good holiday, help you all I can. I shall just suggest things when we get to Torquay. I shall suggest things when I get to Ilfracombe. Now then, you have no need whatsoever to go on any trips or theatres if you don't want, but I shall suggest them, and when I suggest, it's good. It's only the best. When you travel with Cannonball, you're travelling Cannonball's way.
But he hadn't always been such an integral part of the group. It was, in fact, technology that had shaped the relationship between passenger and driver.
In the old vehicles, when the engine was at the front, the driver was in his separate cab alongside the engine. When the horizontal engines came in underneath the vehicle, that enabled the area that had been taken up by the engine at the front to be incorporated in the main passenger compartment of the vehicle, so the driver was then back inside with his passengers.
With the shepherd now seated among his flock, all sorts of mischief could be had.
And quite often on trips, especially trips like bed makers, trips like that, they would say, Cyril, it's hot in here, can you open the roof? So you'd have to stop and open the roof. And you'd be standing there trying to push it back because it was always stiff, and two of these ladies here would quickly have your trousers down, which used to cause a great laugh for everybody. If it was in the morning, it sort of loosened up the day a bit.
And it wasn't always the passengers providing the entertainment. More often than not, it was the driver.
Many years ago, I was told the story of the early 60s of a man who was a one-man band. And he used to strap a drum to the back of his seat, and he would have drumsticks on his elbows as he's driving. He would have a mouth organ strapped round, you know, and he would go bang, bang, and sing. A lot of them could sing as well.
No, we used to join in because that made them feel as if you was part of it. You know, used to go to Scotland. When we went to Scotland, used to take a kilt and that sort of thing. You know, lots of people done that. So you took part in whatever was going on. You had to think about the fact that you was going to get a tip at the end of the job. So the more you joined in and the more they enjoyed themselves, you hope that you'd get treated better.
See you again. Yes. Right, thanks. Bye, dear. Don't get lost now. Hey, what's that?
Well, I mean, if you went away for a week, I can't remember, but I mean, if you got any more than sort of for a week, any more than £5, you was really doing well, because £5 was a lot of money. You know, I think wages then were about 30 bob or something, weren't they? Yeah, it was. I don't think you didn't play on that much, but it was always, I think, in the average coach driver in the back of your mind, what am I going to get when I get back on Saturday?
Many drivers were incredibly inventive when it came to earning their keep.
One of my favourite stories is regarding Wallace Arnold drivers in Ilfracombe. A lot of tours to Ilfracombe in the 60s and 70s, which meant that every day of the week there was a Wallace Arnold driver in Ilfracombe on a free day. And they came up with the idea of how they could earn some more money. They would get a job. And one of the leader of the gang went down to the council and got himself a job as a deck chair attendant. He was only free for one day, but there were 6 other men. So every day of the week there was a Wallace Arnold driver in Ilfracombe. So it was Jeff on Monday, George on Tuesday, Fred on Wednesday, so and so. And once a week the wage packet came and it was shared out amongst the 7 of them. On one occasion, there was like 3 or 4 drivers in town, and they all met up in the pub one lunchtime for a get-together and a natter. And not only was too much alcohol involved, because they were all rest day that day, they weren't driving, but also there was a free shower, and all the deck chairs were watched off the beach. And Jeff was sacked, along with George and John and Bill and whatever else.
But the most popular money spinner of all involved a piece of chalk and a tyre.
On some trips, not all of them, if people were in the mood for a bit of gambling and like something different, a bit exciting on the way, you'd put all the numbers on the tyre and put an arrow up here. Well, I'd just put this one like this. And then everybody would pay like 2 pence or something in those days. And whatever number stopped, when you stopped, either for the loo or for a cup of tea or when you get to your destination. So you'd put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you'd mark it all the way round, and however many people you'd got on the bus. Maybe you have 20 or maybe you have 30 or only 10. And then when you stop, whichever number stops opposite this arrow collects the winnings. And everybody used to get very excited about that, I can tell you. And then you could do it again on your way home. But everybody used to get upset if you rubbed up against the curb and rubbed all the numbers off on the way, and then you'd stop and put some more on. But that's how it worked.
You didn't have a chance to get bored in those days. There was always some action going on in the coach, you know. Everybody was doing something. Entertainment was free and it was brilliant.
As the journey got underway, the passengers settled back into the rhythm of the ride, enveloped in coachly warmth and comfort. Some might sleep, some might want to enjoy the scenery, and some might pull out their lovingly prepared refreshments.
See, there was no drinks in those days, like you couldn't get drinks like this in them days, so she used to get just a milk bottle, you know, a Stella bottle, sterilised milk. You used to have a pressed top on, you used to fill it with water and press the top back on and open it and stand it up in the bag. And that was what you drank on the way down the coach, just tap water. She used to call it Corporation Pop, you know. and then anybody else was adding on. Said, does anybody want to drink a Corporation Pop? And somebody would shout, aye, pass it down. And this big bottle of Stella, you just pass it down the coach, and then they'd come back. That was so funny, that was.
And you could guarantee that within a couple of hours of setting off, they'd want to stop again.
Well, one of the issues was that coaches didn't have toilets on board, and of course drinking both on board and along the way was part of the day out, and so this created quite a few difficulties for people. And it was much easier for men because, you know, in those days you didn't have motorways, so the coach could stop the minute you tapped on the door and told the driver to stop. Out would get the men and all go behind, say, a pile of gravel by the road. It would be quite easy for them, but the poor women couldn't do that, and it wouldn't have been appropriate anyway.
There was one coach driver, he used to take a tent, like a sort of a bathing tent, little bathing tent, and a little portaloo thing, like a potty, just a normal potty for the ladies. And if anybody was bursting, he'd pull up at the roads, especially with the traffic jam, because people got desperate, you know. So what he'd do with the ladies, he'd run out the coach and set this little tent up. It was something he got from the GPO, what they used to put over the manhole covers. And he used to set this tent up at the side of the coach, the ladies would come out and go in, then they get the little pot, throw it in the bushes, and then the next one would go in and they do the same.
What became really important were halfway houses, and I can remember my own relatives years after they stopped going out by coaches from the East End to Southend pointing out the halfway house along the way to Southend, and it was a great relief for the women to be able to get out and have a pee at those places.
You would have a situation where you'd probably have 10, 15 coaches, you could have 400 people there. 2 toilets, 1 gents, 1 ladies. Not 2 blocks of a gents toilet, a ladies toilet. Huge queues at the toilet. People couldn't decide whether to go for a drink and then queue for the toilet, or queue for the toilet and go for a drink. Half the party was queued at the toilets, trying to miss the coach when it left.
Right, we've got 10 minutes, we're going, 10 minutes. And there could be a queue, a 20-minute long queue, so you'd have to just wee where you could, anywhere you could.
On the way to Southend, there was a sort of a drift, an old road, disused road, that everybody used to back in there. Not everybody, but lots of people did, and get their beer out, you know, at the afternoon stop. All these old ladies used to go down this drift road to have a pee, you know, and then 1 or 2 of the clever ones, they'd get a bottle and stand it upright in the ground and put a rocket in it, you know. You know what a rocket is, don't you? Just put the wooden bit in, and then just before it was going off, kick it over so it went down this drift road and lit it all up. And there's all these ladies having to pee down this road. That used to be great fun, that did. Mind you, they weren't right next to you. They was like where those trees are, really. That used to be good fun.
I only met recently quite an eminent professor of history at Oxford who told me that when he was a student on a coach, he had actually resorted to peeing in his briefcase in desperation.
Those were fascinating days, how people put up with travel and they didn't expect nothing else, because that's all they knew, you know. It was just part of the journey, part of the travel. If you wanted to go down a long journey, you had to put up with whatever circumstances hit you, like, you know.
But it was an old friend who came to the rescue of the desperate coach passenger, the good old British pub.
An important impact that these new day trips had was that pubs started to change. And suddenly you saw for the first time the classic sign, "Coach parties welcome."
And it was a match made in heaven.
If it was a biggish pub, they would open in the morning, you know, for drinks and tea and coffee. They were popular, and you always knew where they were. They were sort of regular places on regular routes, and you'd meet up with a lot of other buses and coaches there. Everybody would get a chat, and the pub lady would give you a cup of tea and a piece of cake and say, "See you tonight."
There's a very good account that Robert Tressel uses in his semi-autobiographical novel, The Rugged Trouser Philanthropist, and these employees, take their coach into the countryside to their destination via 6 public houses. To get to the destination, which was a public house.
As coach travel swept through the country, there was one place which stood out among all the others and became the unlikely hub of the industry. Stately Cheltenham.
Every coach company in the country used to meet there, you see.
Cheltenham was the home of black and white motorways, part of a team of 6 coach operators who'd come together in 1934 to pool resources. With its convenient geographical location, it naturally formed a central axis for coach journeys.
People used to change from Yelloway's coach if they're going to Wales or they're going to Bournemouth or going to London. They'd get as far as Cheltenham from Manchester and they'd change to a different coach, you see. That was OK, doing that. But if you went into the cafe and you was carrying on down to Torquay, there could have been about 40 Yelloway coaches on the car park and about another 40 on hire to Yellowways.
The times of the services were such that they would all arrive into Cheltenham at set times, ready to all depart at the same time. Now, the principal departure from Cheltenham was the 2 o'clock departure.
So when you went in the cafe, you was that desperate to get in the cafe, to get in the queue, that when you came back out, where's my coach? You didn't know where your blasted coach was. So you had to, hopefully, a lot of people used to look for the driver. So they used to wait for the driver coming out of the restaurant and follow him then, you see, like the Pied Piper, like, whoa, where's the driver? We're laughing. But a lot of people, if they missed the driver, but they were searching for ages. And the driver used to have a count on the coach and there could be half a dozen people missing.
With up to 200 coaches on the forecourt and up to 40 in the same livery, trying to find your own vehicle was like a game of musical coaches.
And then at 2 o'clock, all the coaches would leave together, and for about 15 minutes or half an hour, the centre of Cheltenham was absolutely log-jammed.
It was a sight and a sound to behold.
It was called a mass exodus, and that was when every coach left the depot. The noise was unbelievable. You could tell what sort of vehicle it was, whether it was an AC, a Crossley, a Gardner engine or something like that. They all had different noises. So you could stand on the corner or in a coach station, here comes an AC, here comes a Leyland, and they'd come around the corner, and it was. You know, especially when you're going through shops in the town centres, and you could hear the echo. You know, the echo of the engine, the exhaust. You used to echo off the building. Oh, that sounds nice. Our coach sounds gorgeous. And you used to look out the window and see the reflection of the coach going past and the noise. So, whoa, that's us going past. It was brilliant.
As coach technology accelerated, the passengers were determined to take their much-loved coach further than ever before, even if it meant hoisting it up by crane.
The continent suddenly became easy to get to. Coaches had to be winched on board. There was no roll-on, roll-off ferry, so a coach would get to Dover and it would be chained on to this ferry and chained off in wherever we went to Ostend, Boulogne, Calais, wherever.
And with the coach safely delivered to foreign shores, the coach capsule adventure could continue with a continental twist.
Our first night on the continent was Reims, which was very nice. We usually sampled the champagne, of course. And then on to Interlaken for 6 nights, where we stayed at the 5-star Victoria Jungfrau.
But 5-star hotels, which weren't used to dealing with coach tours, had some stuffy rules that Barbara found difficult to swallow.
My driver, Stanley, and I had seated ourselves in the main dining room when I was told that the managing director would like to see me at the desk. I went along and he said, "I'm sorry, but in this hotel, chauffeurs must eat in another dining room." And I was very put out by this. I was quite indignant and said, "Well, that's ridiculous." I said, "We eat together at all the other hotels," to which I was told, "Yes, but this is the 5-star Victoria Jungfrau." And I said, "Well, if my driver has to eat elsewhere, I must eat with him, because we are a team." And so Stanley and I were moved actually into a very nice ballroom with a painted ceiling, and there was a little area that was roped off, and we sat there with the 4-piece band.
And the band played on, Until 4 seasons later, the Interlaken Hotel came to its senses.
And at that point, the head waiter came to me and said, "Oh, the managing director says that you and your driver may eat with the people." So we were moved from behind our little roped area, just a few yards, into this lovely ballroom with our passengers. And at the end of the season, when the passengers were moved back to this lovely main dining room at the front of the hotel, we moved with them. So we broke their laws, we broke their rules.
With coach parties breaking down the old order and cutting new paths through Europe, the coach responded to the latest demands wherever they came from.
Austria, Swiss are always very, very popular. Wonderful scenery. People have heard of the places they're going to. And every so often, you would get something like The Sound of Music would come along, and you would have this wonderful vista of Salzburg, and all of a sudden holidays to Austria would go up.
And in this era of romantic travel, passengers not only fell in love with their coach, but with each other.
At Grindelwald, where people went on the chairlift, which was a double chairlift, and we had a young couple who'd been pretty lovey-dovey all the tour. They'd come together, and they went on the chairlift, and when they came down and got back into the coach, they announced their engagement. We were all delighted. And then when I told the following group, I said, it's a lovely ride, it's peaceful, you go over streams, pine trees, you see cattle with cowbells around their necks, and it's very, very lovely ride. And I said, in fact, on the last tour, we had a couple who announced their engagement after going up on it. And the one gentleman called from the back. He was with his wife, but he called out, "Can you get a divorce on it?" To which she gave him a nudge in the ribs.
Like a marriage, the coach offered comfort and security. Its reassuring and constant presence enabled it to lead its passengers safely into the more exotic parts of Europe and beyond.
Everybody wanted to go to Russia. It was one of our most popular holidays. It was 15 days, and loved it. And it went for years and years. It was the place to go. The Grand Russian Spectacular, we called it. In St. Petersburg, the part of the coach near the hotel, and this shady-looking man came up and said, "Would you like us to guard the coach?" And they said, "What do you mean, guard?" "Well, it's a bit rough around here, you know." And they said, "Well, how much is it?" And I think he charged the equivalent of 50p. And he sat all night with his Kalashnikov rifle in front of the coach outside the hotel.
The feeling that you could get in a coach very locally and go to somewhere pretty exotic with all your luggage and your neighbours on board, and then come back again with them and be dropped back in the same place, such as Bolton, was very attractive to people.
While coach tours were busy invading other countries, back in Britain, we were advancing on the home front too. The sound of bulldozers gave more than a hint that the way we travelled and the speed we did it at were about to change. Work began on Britain's first motorway, the Preston Bypass, in 1957. As motorway mania caught hold, it wasn't long before the whole country was carved up by this new high-speed road system. But while motorways allowed coach travel to evolve, they also upset traditional coaching routes, and casualties fell by the wayside. It stood as an uneasy warning sign that there was trouble on the road ahead.
I mean, I can remember, you know, travelling down the A1 from the late 50s, going on family holidays, and every year we went, another town had been bypassed. so you knocked another half an hour off the journey. And ultimately, coaches that took 10 hours to get to London were doing it in 5 and then 4.
Now that more people could afford to buy their first car, the coach was forced to share its passengers and the motorway with shinier, faster vehicles.
Before the motorways were opened, hardly any cars could pass you really, unless you got a long straight road. Some of the lanes used to go down and through the town centre was so narrow, but once you got on the motorway, it's just like it was like another world. It was so different, and it was, woof, you could see these things whizzing past you.
But our coaches were still designed for Britain's pre-motorway A roads, and had a lot of catching up to do if they were to cope with the new high-speed, longer-distance journeys.
Midland Red, who were Birmingham-based and very innovative, built their own vehicles, in fact. In 1959, I think it was, built a turbocharged coach that could do 90 miles an hour, allegedly, down the bit of motorway between Birmingham and London.
Well, the driver who took me on this proving run was Mr. Donald Sinclair, the general manager of the Midland Red Bus Company, which wishes to operate this new service.
Gosh, we clocked 82 miles an hour going round those banks.
Yes.
And
yes.
in a bus.
In a bus, yes.
But are you going to travel at 80 miles an hour on the motorway?
Oh, no, we don't expect to have to do that speed. We shall probably restrict these to a maximum of about 70 miles an hour.
Even with restrictions, coach speed had doubled and was becoming faster and more frantic.
So coaches can now operate at 50, 60, 70 miles per hour for long distances. Journeys are sped up, and I think for the first time this makes the coach a serious competitor with the railways over long distances of 100 or 200 miles where there is a parallel railway line.
And not only that, coaches were about to get an additional boost. In 1963, Minister of Transport Ernest Marple commissioned a report into the profitability of British railways, written by Dr. Richard Beeching.
Dr. Beeching, do you personally believe that the government has no real alternative but to accept your plan?
I think that these proposals are in the long-term interests of railwaymen. I think they'll go along with us.
Beeching's remit was to try to make the railways pay, or at least not lose as much money as they had been doing in the 1950s. And he took a long, hard look at some of the traffic which the railways had traditionally carried, like large numbers of people to and from seaside resorts for just a few weeks in the year, and basically said the railways should not be in this business.
Today's report will shape the future of the system. More than 2,000 stations will be closed. The most dramatic effects are in Scotland. Remote areas of the Highlands will lose their services. Wales takes a body blow as well. Holiday resorts in the West Country share the fate of many market towns. No station, no passenger trains. In the northeast, little more than the main north-south links will remain.
It was a brutal blow to the railways, but it meant that many more express coaches were needed for direct routes.
If someone wanted to go from London to South Wales in the 50s, they would go to Cheltenham and connect with a service from Cheltenham to South Wales. As soon as we got a motorway, we had through services from Victoria to Newport and Cardiff. So we suddenly cut out Cheltenham. And the sad thing is that Cheltenham, which had been a major hub in the coaching map, was no longer needed, and the coach station at Cheltenham closed, and it just became a point on a timetable.
As Britain's motorway network continued to grow rapidly throughout the 1960s, so did our holidaying habits. As we travelled further afield in our own private cars, traditional seaside destinations started to fall out of fashion and struggled when the holidaymakers went elsewhere.
Blackpool was a northern as Margate, Margate was a southern as Blackpool, I suppose you would say. Huge, huge numbers, hundreds and hundreds of coaches would go on a Sunday in particular for the day. Gone. That business is completely gone. I was in Margate a couple of months ago now, talking with the council about coach parking. Didn't see a coach. The infrastructure's gone, the entertainment's gone. Dreamland, I think it was, at Margate, the entertainment, derelict. And it's sad, but you know, it's not kept up with what the public wants to do.
I travelled with railways until I got my first motor car, which was in the late 1970s. And then we used the car then to come down to Torquay, which was not the same. It wasn't the same when you're crammed in a car, you've not got the freedom of a coach. But nevertheless, everybody started getting cars then, you see.
It's all about, I suppose, the magic word public service, because technically a coach was known as a public service vehicle. And it had to have a public service vehicle licence to operate it, and a driver had to have a public service vehicle licence to drive it. And they're the key words, public service. And the successful operators provided the public with a service and flourished, and the others didn't.
The rise of car ownership and cheap air travel meant the coach industry saw a gradual falling off of trade. And as the political and economic landscape also began to change, the express coach network was seen as too vulnerable to be left to its own devices. In 1969, the coach industry was nationalised. 3 years later, it was brought under one corporate livery, which became National Express.
With the emergence of National Express in the early 1970s, operating over the motorway network, which by the end of the 1970s was essentially complete, we reached the end of an era.
And under National Express, the colourful coaches which we knew and loved so well were painted a uniform, ghostly white.
Whilst it caused a lot of heartache and, you know, amongst traditionalists, I have to say, if you want a network, then you have to have a standard livery. So you used to have white royal blues, you had white black and whites, you had white Midland reds, you had white grey cars, which was a nonsense. But it was done with the best intentions to get an image of a nationwide express coach network.
This idea that with the prism that the colour white divides up into all the colours of the rainbow, and now, come nationalisation, all the colours of the rainbow were being pulled back in to the colour white. It almost epitomised what had happened to the industry there, because at that point, a lot of that wonderful familiarity, that wonderful family feeling was automatically lost.
You know, I've been out of the industry now for 5 years, and I have to say, looking back, I sent out the best of it.
With the loss of the colour, we had lost the personality of the business, the really, really lovely specialness. The colour had gone out of it. The colour, I don't think, will come back again, not as it was.
Bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow.